Begin this morning by talking to you about something very personal. Something very personal. I want to talk to you for a moment about shopping for shoes. New shoes. So many choices, right? Colors and styles and purposes. How do you choose these days? What you're going to put on those precious feet at the end of your body. New shoes. How do you choose those new shoes? This past week, I had the privilege and honor of being able to attend the open house for the young people going back to school at Allen Shepherd Elementary School, where I got to represent Blessings in a Backpack, River Valley Communities, and share with parents and community folks what we do about feeding kids on the weekends during the school year, and meeting a bunch of children, and handing out fruit snacks, and blowing bubbles, and having a really good time. And during the open house, I went down the hallway of the school, and as I peered into the classrooms, every desk, just about every desk, had a brand new pair of gym shoes. I don't know if they call them gym shoes anymore. I think they call them PE shoes or something like that. But gym shoes, shoes that they're going to wear when they do their physical activity in the gymnasium and outside and so forth, all on the desk. And it made me think about back in the days when I was a young person going to school and got the new gym shoes and all the school supplies and how the bags smelled and everything. Not so great at the end of the school year, but at the beginning of the school year, you could smell the crayons and all the things in the bag and those new shoes. It was all nice. But what I remembered was, as I looked through the classrooms, there was every color of the rainbow in the shoes sitting on top of the desk. There were orange ones and green ones and red ones and blue ones and purple ones, bright pink, neon-colored shoes, and there were some black ones, and there were some standard old white ones, and there was a few of this and that. And I can remember that when I was a young person, that I don't remember putting our shoes on top of the desk. It was like you just didn't do that. But anyway, we had to put them under our desk, and everybody had a pair of white tennis shoes.
Yeah.
Then there was the one kid who had a pair of black tennis shoes. And he had to take them home because they weren't non-marking soles. And they wouldn't let him have them in the gym. But everybody had a white pair of tennis shoes. I thought they were the greatest things in the world. And the only difference was what brand they were. Right? Because that told everybody which store your parents had bought them from. And how much money you may or may not have had as a family. If it had the little swoosh, it was an expensive shoe, right? But if it had some other brand names, it may have come from Kmart or someplace and been a lot less expensive. But I wore them every year through gym class, and they got me through just as good as the little swoosh on the shoes. Once you decided about your shoes, though, especially back in those days, you were all in. You bought the shoe, you took it home, there were no exchanges, no returns, you had worn the shoe, it's yours forever, right? And so the choice that you made was so important, and still today. You know, you spend a bunch of money on a pair of shoes and you want to make sure you made the right decision, and not a week later you're going to say, man, I wish I had bought these shoes, right? So that decision can be very, very important. That choice that we make can be very important. The early followers of Jesus, to whom the letter of Ephesians is written to. We've been talking about Ephesians for the last 6 weeks. This is our last Sunday going through Paul's letter. This group of folks had lots of big choices to make in their lives. Some of them had come from older religions, from Some of them had come out of the Hebrew faith of the Jewish religion. Some had come from other kinds of religions that worshiped other gods and goddesses. And some had come from no religious belief per se at all. And here they were with this new story of new life given through this guy who died, was crucified, was executed by the Roman Empire, and who rose again and granted to all new and abundant life. Lots of choices to make. Do we listen to Paul? Do we listen to Peter? Do we listen to the people at our home congregation? Who's telling us the truth? What's the right answers? How do we stay faithful when we know that there are legions of Roman soldiers right outside the door, ready at any moment, to get rid of us if they believe that we are traitors to the empire or we're going to cause problems in our community in any way? See, the people of Ephesus and other communities of the first century church lived in a very different situation than we do. They lived in an understanding under the tyranny of empire, occupied by the Roman Empire. They lived under the understanding of empire that says that the emperor is more than just a man. Is more than just a man. The emperor is a superman, a superhuman, because the emperor is known as a son of God, a son of God. One of the things that we have learned in the past 50 to 60 years, actually, in the Church of Jesus Christ through archaeological digs and such, is that many of the Roman edifices had written right on them, carved right in the stone, that Caesar was the Son of God. The Son of God. That made Caesar something more special than the average Joe, right? Because now Caesar, being at least half divine and half human, had divine powers, right? Had divine powers. So Caesar is extremely powerful, and his empire is extremely powerful, and it's filled with legions of armored-clad soldiers who are constantly looking for anyone who puts someone else above Caesar, another god above Caesar. Because when you do that, you are not a patriot, you are a traitor to the empire. And the result of that is death. And death by crucifixion, by the way. So in the letter to Ephesians, Paul writes that, "Be strong in the Lord and in the strength of God's power. For our struggle is not against enemies of blood and flesh, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers." He goes on even in the passage to name them as devils, if you will. But I want to help you understand that the devils that Paul is naming here are not horned beasts with cloven feet and a pointy tail and a pitchfork. That's more Dante kind of stuff. Okay? The devils that Paul is talking about are the Roman leadership. Caesar himself, Son of God, with cosmic power to destroy and to terrorize. Because that's the reality that they existed under, was that kind of terror. If you're a comic book follower and you like the Marvel series, and you saw the latest Marvel movie, Infinity Wars, then the Emperor is Thanos. Okay? And if you're not, don't worry about that. Just think superhuman, monster kind of evil person. That's what the Emperor was. That's how the Emperor was seen by the early church. Because in their experience, being who they were, believing in Jesus as Son of God and of one God who's greater than even Caesar, that experience got them in trouble, got them killed. We call them martyrs for the faith. One commentator that I read thinking about this passage said that human distortions of power thrive in secrecy, in deception, in violence, and in the capacity to drive a wedge between groups by promoting fear and suspicion. You see, the emperor gets his power by pitting you against you, by telling you that she's your problem and telling you that he's your problem. This is why you're in the place that you are. And the emperor gets his power because he can get you to fight against you and you to fight against him. And he can do whatever he wants, and you don't even recognize that he's the one taking your power away from you all the while. And he does that in secrecy. Caesar did that with his small group of senators and others, that they passed laws and made different things happen so that it was harder and harder to be this group or that group or whatever group in their culture. And then pitted them one against each other, telling each other lies about each other, saying this group over here is all full of murderers, and this group over here is all full of lazy people, and this is why we don't have enough food to eat, and this is why we have violence in our world. But the violence was really being perpetrated by the soldiers coming into the communities in the first place. Distortions of power are in history and maybe even in the present world. Secrecy and deception and violence and pitting one group, driving a wedge between groups with fear and suspicion. You just can't trust those kind of people because they're going to get you. All right? The truth is, friends, that God's grace revealed in Jesus Christ, made known in Jesus Christ, has enemies. We live in a culture that proclaims judgment and fear, not God's unconditional love and acceptance. We very quickly turn to, guilty, guilty, this is wrong, you're wrong, etc. in our culture. That's quick, but we're really slow to open our arms and say, brother, sister, we are children of God. And God's love tells me, welcome, welcome, come. Let's figure out how to be human together. Our culture says that mercy and gentleness and humility, that radical hospitality, all of those things that are values of God are weak. They are weak. We even dismiss them as unpatriotic or idealistic. This weekend, our nation is remembering Senator John McCain, a hero, a soldier in Vietnam, a prisoner of war, came back and served his country, did so with great humility at times, and great patience and perseverance through sickness and all the other things. I said in the earlier service that I believe that some of his own humility, his own self-understanding of having humility is probably what allowed him to survive being a POW as he did. And then to come back and serve your nation and do that with poise, and do that with diplomacy, and do that with kindness at times, and mercy, is a pretty special thing in a human being, especially one who experienced the trauma he did in his life. And so, like I say, there's things I may not agree with Senator McCain and decisions and laws and so forth. But I will honor that character, that person who had that mercy, had that gentleness, had that humility, and today is ridiculed because of it. Because our culture thinks that's weak. That's not patriotic. Right? Even the faith community gets polarized and segregated. This idea of judgment, proclaiming judgment and fear, right? We're quick to tell somebody else about their sins without recognizing that we all along have sin ourselves, and maybe even the greater sin. If you can't read this comic, I'll read it to you really quickly. You have the guy with the beam sticking out of his eye, the guy with a splinter sticking out of his eye, and this guy over here with the log. And he says, you just told him that he has a splinter in his eye, and you have a beam in yours. But he can't see the log, the whole tree stump in his. So we polarize ourselves on right and left, on fundamentalist and non-fundamentalist, liberal, progressive. We give ourselves all kinds of labels. And then we stand and we look at each other and we point and we say, you've got a splinter in your eye, when the beam is in ours, perhaps, or greater. God's grace has enemies. God's justice has enemies as well. When we value profits over healthy communities, and discrimination steals opportunities, and deceptive practices and lies become just business, and that's the way things work. Justice has enemies when resources are controlled and consumed by a few at the expense of many. God's justice has enemies as well as God's peace has enemies. All you have to do is turn on the news that I always tell you to turn off. And in a few minutes, you know that God's peace has enemies. You know that there is violence and trouble in the world. There are bombings and shootings, that there's mass killings, that there's violence in the streets of our cities. There's violence in our families and our homes, domestic violence that takes lives. It doesn't take much to find out that God's peace has enemies. So we're granted a choice in this life. We're granted the choice of which power to place our trust in, right? Are we going to place our trust in physical might and the weapons of war, those soldiers clanking through those ancient cities with armor and shields and helmets and swords? Are we going to place our trust in economic and social success? So if you're a billionaire, we should trust you. So if you're a millionaire, we should trust you. If you've had a successful business, no matter how many other people's jobs you've stolen away from them or taken away or whatever else you've done, we should trust you. That's what makes for us to trust. And social success, because you've got platinum albums, we should trust you. That's where we should place our trust, just because you can carry a good tune, a nice pitch, and you're a recording artist, and you have a big following. That's who we trust, and we place our trust in. We place our trust in people who think very highly of themselves, who think they are the answer to everything, that they are God's solution to the problems of the world. Who do we place? Where do we place our trust? Paul says, take up the whole armor of God. Take up the whole armor of God and stand firm. The armor of God is not like the Roman armor. The armor of God is not like the armor of those soldiers coming into the communities. You see, the theory, the philosophy of Rome was that if we were powerful enough, if we had enough military might, we could make peace because nobody would fight against us. And so we would control everything, and there'd be peace. Even though it meant no freedoms, it meant no liberties, it meant people could not advance in their social economic status, it meant you had to stay doing exactly what you were doing. Do not step out of line. Because if you did, it was life to pay. It was life to pay. But the peaceable kingdom of God that Paul was trying to share with the early church at Ephesus and tries to share with us yet today does not rely on armor and swords and shields, even though he uses those metaphors, but it relies on truth, like the belt of truth. It relies on righteousness, living in right relationships with one another. It relies on wearing the right kind of shoes on your feet. Shoes that proclaim the gospel of peace. That proclaim the gospel of peace. Back a couple decades ago, a certain type of shoes caught the attention of young people and also caused a lot of mayhem. Do you remember them? Remember Air Jordans from the 1990s? You can probably still get them. I don't know how many versions of Air Jordans there have been. And then in the 2000s, LeBron James had a shoe brand come out called the LeBron X that sold for a measly $315 a pair. Enormous profit for the company and for the superstar. The Urban League even protested them even releasing those shoes because they said they were an empty status symbol representing twisted by priorities and confused values. Because here's what happened. You know the stories. You know that those were not shoes ready to proclaim the gospel of peace. Instead, boys and girls died because of those shoes. People were murdered and those shoes were taken off of them just to get those shoes. They were more valuable than the life that wore them. That is the way. That is the way of the Roman world. That is the way of the world, not the way of God. In Wishful Thinking, Frederick Buechner writes, if you want to know who you really are, distinct from who you like to think you are, then all you have to do is keep an eye on where your feet take you. Keep an eye on where your feet take you. Peace, Paul says, is the goal. Our feet, not our words, will get us there. Our average lifespan is about 28,000 days. That's about how many days we get. Today is number 17,355 for me. 17,355. My feet have taken me many places during those 17,000 days. My feet have taken me into the halls of education and under the desk of education. My feet have taken me to the bedsides of persons in illness, to pulpits to preach the good news, to porches to sip on lemonade, to baptistries to welcome new people into the life of Jesus Christ, to altars to serve at the table, to gravesides to celebrate good and long lives, and to mourn and to grieve in short and too short lives, at mission sites to help those in need, at soup lines to make sure people weren't hungry, in marches to demonstrate for peace and for justice, and in meetings to help people see a different way. And still other days, my feet have taken me in those 17,000 days down quiet trails connected to my bicycle across miles, to the halls of history and places of fun and thrills, to the ottoman of my chair with my family and my friends. So the question today, as we end our series in Ephesians, is where do your feet take you? Where do your feet take you? Are you wearing shoes capable of proclaiming the gospel of peace in Jesus Christ? Are you ready to be all in with God? Are you ready to be clothed with God's grace, with God's justice, with God's peace? Well, Ephesians has good news for you and for us today. Because in Paul, if you have known the Lord Jesus Christ, if you've come to know the Lord Jesus Christ, then you already have the outfit. You don't even have to go to the store and pick new shoes. They're right there. All you have to do is choose to wear them. Amen.